I have a question for you, curious Tarnished. Throughout your journey in the lands between, while not being bullied, impaled, ambushed, yeeted to your death, or going through all the other gazillion forms of torture this game has to offer, have you ever taken a moment to just stop, look around for a while, then start asking silly questions like, what's here? What's there? How deep is that drop? And why is this door closed? How was this even built? Well, I think both of us know the answer. Of course you do. A lot of you detail-hungry maniacs like me seem to have similar questions about Elden Ring. And now, with 23 videos and counting, I don't even seem close to covering all of them. That's why today I'm going to cover 2 suggestions at the same time that I have received from you curious Tarnished. The first being a brief analysis of the Haligtree's level design, while also explaining how legacy dungeons interact with the overworld. Then later we'll try figuring out what the hell is that place over there. Sounds good? So buckle up, grab your boiled prawn buckets, and let's see what in the world is going on around the manipulative femboy tree. I don't know if it was Miquella's genius plan, or just Miyazaki's usual sadistic nature at play here. But who the hell thought it was a good idea to have the only teleporter that sends you to this so-called paradise of the outcast spawn you at the very top of a gigantic tree? Not only that, mister, you will have to make the journey down this spaghetti of branches on your own. So if you're not a Tarnished that can be just brought back magically from the dead each time they slip and fall, good luck dreaming of even making it to the next part. What's even more hilarious is that the Haligtree was meant as this giant homeless shelter for all the poor races that been bullied by the Golden Order, which includes first-generation Albinaurics. Now, if I ask you, what's the most memorable thing that comes to your mind when you think of these enemies? Well, you might say that their aim is fucking broken, and you would be correct. But other than that, it's their legs. They suck. Have you ever seen one of them walking around instead of riding their puppy? Of course not. Now, how in the world are you gonna make it down that spaghetti of tree branches with those legs once you spawn there?
Oh, no! No! Ow.
We're not even sure if you can teleport your puppy with you through that teleporter. And even if you somehow bring it with you, platforming your way down is not exactly the simplest task on a wolfback. I'm sure you remember what happened the last time you tried that in Deeproot Depths while riding Torrent Deer Tarnished. Hell, even Loretta, who is supposedly an Albinauric, is still an anomaly to me. How in the world did she make it down there? The way I see it, she either was actually the chaddest of chads of her people and just Mario'd her way down there with her horse, or she was a fraud and bribed some carrion intern to teleport her there. Either way, don't ask me why you don't see any other Albinaurics in this place. I know if I was one, I'd rather stay at Ordina Liturgical Town with my gang bullying those puzzle solvers and having a good time instead of teleporting myself to my grave. You see, Tarnished? Once you start looking at this world through the eyes of the common man, instead of the tarnished character that can magically hide 500 armor pieces and weapons in their butt cheeks, you start to realize that some building layouts are designed to make your life a nightmare. But in the end, this is still just level design targeted towards the player, but I wanted us to have a different perspective to really see how silly some of these layouts can be from a lore point of view. But lore aside, let's jump into the technicalities now and explain an important sneaky interaction that happens every time you step into a legacy dungeon in Elden Ring. Now, to understand the relationship between the overworld and legacy dungeons, we first need to make things clear by understanding how this massive overworld map of Elden Ring actually works. And for that, there is an essential component you need to learn about, and it's called Super Overworld. So what even is this Super Overworld? Well, to put it simply, it's a one big illusion. You see, while Elden Ring is an open-world game, most of the distant landmarks you notice once you step out to Limgrave are not exactly real. The overworld of Elden Ring uses a map called Super Overworld. This map is a low-resolution replica of the entire lands between. The main role of this map is to replace what is supposed to be seen in the distance, even though the real level is not actually being physically rendered yet. Take the Forge of the Giants, for example. You can see it all the way from here in Limgrave, but if you move the camera towards it and inspect it closely, it's very clear that it's not the same quality or shape as the real one. Elden Ring's open world is split into a grid structure. These grids react to the player's current position on the map through collision detection. With that information, the game decides when to load the real map with high detail assets and level geometry for that area. When that happens, that portion of the fake Super Overworld map gets replaced until the player moves away to another grid. All of this happens seamlessly, of course, throughout your playthrough, but it can be observed by modding the game and flying from a fully loaded grid into a low-resolution one without touching any ground collisions. And that, dear Tarnished, is pretty much a simple summary of how the overworld works. Now at this point, you might be wondering, how does this tie back to Legacy Dungeons? Well, thankfully, it's easy to explain. You see, Legacy Dungeons in Elden Ring are almost always split into two maps, a main map and an overworld version. The main map is where you can actually walk around, fight enemies, and explore. Meanwhile, the overworld variant is usually just there to decide what should be visible from outside the dungeon. In most closed dungeons with no way to see what's outside, that overworld variant is just an empty void. But in cases of dungeons with a lot of open space, like Fara Mazula or Stormvale Castle, they instead use the Super Overworld map we talked about earlier to sell you the illusion of the outside world. But not all Legacy Dungeons just copy and paste the same Super Overworld. Some Legacy Dungeons actually have their own unique versions of it. Let me explain. Let's say I took two Divine Towers, for example, and placed them right here close to Stormvale Castle. See how big they are? Pretty hard to miss, right? Now let's head inside Stormvale Castle, climb to some high ground and try to spot those towers again. Are you confused? Don't worry, you're not hallucinating. The reason our towers suddenly disappeared is pretty simple. Those towers were placed in the Super Overworld that Limgrave and other open world areas commonly use. But Stormvale Castle has its own unique version of the Super Overworld map. So the only way we'd be able to see those towers from inside Stormvale Castle is by placing them inside that special overworld version as well. This method might seem familiar if you've watched the topic I previously covered on the channel about why Fara Mazula is only visible from the isolated Divine Tower and nowhere else. Well, it's pretty much the same scenario as our two towers example. This method isn't only used to add assets to a map, but also to remove them for game performance. And that brings us back to the Haligtree. Optimizing this huge vertical legacy dungeon is already a pain on its own, but adding the whole open world element to the mix makes it an even bigger headache. So what was the solution here? Well, the Haligtree's location is so convenient that you don't really need a full super overworld here, but just a fraction of it. Specifically this part, and of course, the Erdtree. This is great for game optimization and all that. But there's one massive asset here that puzzled me for the longest time. It's also the second main reason I wanted to revisit the Haligtree for this video. I'm of course talking about... well, technically, it just looks like an island, or at least that's what I thought at first. But when I actually compared this thing to the layout of the lands between, its size was so absurd that calling it an island is like calling the entire map an island as well. If you took a moment to stop and admire the scenery without getting sniped by a ballista from God knows where, then I'm sure you've noticed that big-ass chunk of rock looming ominously around the Haligtree. Naturally, I had plenty of questions about that place, but the first of them was, why can't we see it on the world map? Elden Ring's map is known for being mostly accurate when it comes to the world terrain, but for some reason, a landmark as huge as this is nowhere to be found. Well, it turns out that the answer to my question was pretty simple. Our island is actually placed way up here, far above where the map actually ends. My initial thought was that the Elden Ring map was already huge and vertical, so adding extra space up there would just mess with the overall aesthetic of it. But even with that said, it still felt strange to me how something that massive would be left out of the map. I mean, you could argue that whoever was mapping the world couldn't make it there, especially since the only ships we see in Elden Ring are all conveniently destroyed for some reason. But let's be honest here, if this legendary cartographer managed to make it all the way to Farum Azula and map it somehow, then sailing to a big piece of rock from the Haligtree shouldn't be that hard. But the mapping aside, what's actually insane is the size of this thing. This massive hunk of rock, when placed over the layout of the lands between, pretty much covers most of the goddamn map. The size of this map piece was so impressive, in fact, that I once considered this location to be related to the shadow of the Erdtree DLC, back when we first got that teaser art with Miquella. But obviously, we know now that my guess was wrong. Still, the size and placement of this thing continued to puzzle me. Why even bother putting it here? Is it just a random empty rocky island? Or maybe it's a mountain from the land of reeds staring me in the face? Who knows, really? But what I am sure about is that the Elden Ring world map hides more than it shows. And I'm not just talking about this weird island. There is actually one more bigger map asset that's always present around the lands between. Yet there is no mention of it on the world map either. So let's have a look at it. Yes, I know. First an island and now a continent? But it's true, Curious Tarnished. There's actually a massive landmass, or at least a portion of it surrounding the game map, and it's probably been staring you in the face without you even realizing it. So where was this continent hiding all this time? Well, it's not exactly a secret. You've probably seen it yourself without realizing just how massive it is. If you stand in certain open areas on a clear sunny day, you'll notice a land on the horizon, but I'm pretty sure most of you just glanced at it and didn't think much of it. That's mainly because of how far it is from the playable map. So while I was messing around with some map assets a while back, I decided to investigate this land, and to my surprise, it turned out to be more than 10 times the size of the entire Elden Ring map. Now, for someone like me, this was huge. I've always loved how previous From Software games handled their settings. There was always land or notable landmarks far beyond the playable areas, giving you the sense that the world was much larger than it seemed. Elden Ring, however, already places you in a gorgeous open world that keeps your eyes busy most of the time. But part of me still wished there was something more interesting surrounding the map, instead of just an infinite ocean. So when I first inspected this thing, I started thinking of all sorts of theories about lands beyond the lands between, like the land of reeds or the Badlands we hear about in the intro. But sadly, before I got my hopes up, just one good look at this continent was enough to notice how odd it looked. It's pretty obvious that this thing is just a portion of a terrain asset that's been duplicated and awkwardly stitched together to give the illusion of a large continent. Even the sharp 90-degree angles were left in, since the player wouldn't be able to tell anyway. Whenever I hear the lands between, I always find myself asking, between what exactly? The intro and the map are both pretty vague, hinting that this world exists beyond some kind of fog. Yet if we stand in Limgrave, we can clearly see whatever that distant land is supposed to represent. Now, while this background asset is definitely cool, it's not exactly a solid evidence of anything. And since neither this landmass nor the island next to the Haligtree are marked on the world map, it's probably safe to assume they aren't all that relevant to the actual world building. Regardless, investigating obscure Elden Ring locations and assets is what we do on this channel. So I wasn't too bummed out that these two massive chunks of land didn't end up answering any important questions. But what about you, Curious Tarnished? Let me know your theories about these two locations in the comments. And on that note, dear Tarnished, I think it's time to wrap up this video. Thank you for watching this unusually long video compared to my previous ones. Also, apologies for disappearing for 4 months. Let's just say life has been conveniently keeping me busy, to the point I didn't even have any time left to make content. Luckily, I'm confident the schedule will be much better moving forward. So don't forget to leave a like if I managed to feed your curiosity a little, and subscribe if you're new to the channel. See you soon. Goodbye.